So after all the discussion about promotion, I'm wondering if we should have just kept our original title, which would have been Cheerleaders and Champions. So the other interpretation and meaning of promotion. So, okay, thank you. We're all ready for our last session. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for helping us stay on schedule. Okay. And while we're quieting down and getting back in our spaces, I will just take a minute to remind everybody about in your folder, we do have these speaker bios, so the extended biographies of the speakers. You can take a quick glance at now or a longer glance at later, as well as our resource guide for accessing and finding artist books at the Met, both in Watson Library, Department of Drawings and Prints, photographs, and books about artist books. If anybody is watching this streaming online, we have links and URLs within the description on the Facebook Live page and description. Okay. So, and I will invite everybody, I'll take this opportunity first to remind everybody, stand back, okay, that at, after this session, which is scheduled to end at 4:30, we do invite everybody up for a reception in Watson Library, where we do have a display of a number of the books that we've spoken about today in these presentations, and especially from this last panel and session here. Okay, I'll step back. Okay. Well, that's Liliana's going to come into. Okay. Okay. So our first speaker in this session, session 3, Collectors and Conservation, is Liliana Dematteis. Okay. From the Wall to the Page, Artists Making Books.
Thank you. Okay. I'm very happy and I'm excited to be here and to have the opportunity to participate in this important symposium. And I also want to thank all of you, and in particular Ken, for helping me to find this new prestigious home for my collection. And I apologize with all of you for my bad English. Thank you. And this is a sentence that I stolen from a statement of the protagonist of this symposium, that is Ed Ruscha. But I didn't know that before coming here. And I've stolen from the sentence of Ed Ruscha the word creating, changing it with collecting, because I think that it represents me very well. But like any collector, I'm never satisfied, and I always miss a piece, a title. I get the anxiety to own, and sometimes I would like also steal what I missed. And I feel ignorant every time I come across something that I don't know. But I must admit, with all of you, that I never really decided to become a collector of artist book, because in fact it happened almost unconsciously while doing my daily activity as a gallerist. I'm Italian. Oops, no. Okay. Excuse me. I'm Italian and I come from Turin. That is my city and is located in northwestern Italy, not far from the borders of France. And that was known as the most industrial city in Italy, where Fiat Automobiles was born and located before immigrating here in America. During the post-war years, a lot of work was done in my city to reconstruct not only the industry and working activities, but also the social and cultural community. And it is within this context that at the end of the 50s, a new modern art gallery was built and opened its door, proposing many high-level exhibition, temporary exhibition, who thought to all of us of the town what were movement like surrealism or symbolism or abstractist artists, European or the futurist and so on. And this activity stimulated in the same period also the opening of some private galleries, including mine. My gallery, which was named Galleria Martano, from the name of my first husband who died in 1971, was born in 1966. Here you can see an image of the first location with an exhibition of Luigi Veronesi in 1968, and as you can see, it was beautiful space of the end of 17th century. And this other image is where the second location, the exterior and the interior with an installation of a long roll of industrial painting of Pino Galizio. I closed this gallery 5 years ago. From the beginning, my gallery was mainly dealing with historical, non-figurative avant-gardes, to continue at the end of the 60s with more contemporary artists, like, let's say, Fontana, Yves Klein, Piero Dorazio, among others, and proposing once or twice a year young artists. But it's from this historical artist that I have been particularly influenced because of the quality of their painting, certainly, but also because of their capacity to deal with other types of communication, putting their art at the service of other areas of activity, such as advertising, scenography, music, publishing, graphics, and so on. And I wish to tell you about some important steps in my story that led me at the end to the artist's works. And the first one concerned, for example, a futurist artist that was called Fortunato De Pero, of which in 1969 I curated a large exhibition. And he has been one of the great futurists. What did I touch? My God. Sorry, excuse me. Okay, no, one more. In this exhibition of Fortunato De Pero, I had many very important pieces of painting, but also I had a pile high so of his first and most important books. That is one of the first artist books that was called the Bolted Book, because it was, how can I say, fixed with 2 bolts from the cover. But also he was important not only for that, but also for his imaginative innovation in graphic. Here, this is a drawing of 1929, yes, that's made with new fonts and really graphic design, very innovative. Another artist with whom I worked many times and I had many exhibitions has been Luigi Veronesi, who was born in 1908 and worked many years with me. Veronesi practiced geometric abstraction with elementary forms that were recreated by its sculpture inspired by the Bauhaus. And he taught me the importance of the photography because he has been the first Italian artist during the 30s to introduce the photography as a material for making art in that period. And he has also been a very good graphic designer, using photography for magazines and for publishing houses. This is a small example, a book that he made in 1945, a book for children, in which the application of transparent papers in primary colors invites the child to overlay them to get other colors. And it's something that we can relate to the one book that we have seen this morning by Dieter Roth, if I well remember. A good friend of Luigi Veronesi, coming from Milan too, was Bruno Munari, that many of you know very well. But he made a lot of books, beginning from 1930 with Futurism, with Marinetti and friends, and until few years ago. But I just want to present one that is very important, is the first illegible book that he made in 1953, printed by a publishing house in Netherlands in 2,000 copies. He directly wrote on this book years after, a few lines that I want to read to you. He writes, "This book and my other illegible books communicate something through the nature of the paper, its weight, its color, its shape, its transparency, the format of the pages, the texture, the softness or the hardness, the gloss or the opaque, the cuts or folds. In other words," he says, "paper that is usually considered a supporting and host element of the text and illustration is in reality something that communicates something." That is a good sentence. It's really a good observation. Since my gallery has also been a small publishing house, here you can see some of the titles that I published at that time. I wanted to tell you that one day, while I was in Paris in 67 or 68, I don't remember, I was looking for finding material to publish a book on the Yves Klein writings. And there I discovered in the artist's mother house this booklet that is called Yves Peinture, made in Madrid in 1954. This book has an introduction without any word, just 3 pages of black lines, and 10 loose pages that reproduce monochrome paintings in different colors and different sizes, with captions, complete with title, year, dimensions, and sometimes the signature Yves. But they were paintings that didn't exist, nor in color, nor in size, not in that time or later. Yves Peinture was the proposition of an idea and was a precursor of the conceptual art. And this pure conceptual book has been my antivirus towards a new world and a new way of reading art. And naturally, my interest in gallery work has also been updated, and the conceptual art discourse had also entered fully into my gallery programs of exhibitions. During all the 70s, I worked with artists and organized an exhibition in which the idea was sovereign, was the only protagonist, while the shape and the material became secondary, light, economic, up to the materialization of the work of art. But regarding books, in Italy we had quite a good production in these years, I mean between the 60s and 70s, among the especially among the artists of the conceptual art and the arte povera that we also include in this category. And talking of this, I would like to tell you my first experience as an unaware publisher of an artist book. And it is linked to the exhibition of Vincenzo Agnetti in my gallery. It was 1972, and replacing the usual well-documented catalogue that we usually made for all exhibition, with introduction, text of critics and artists, and imaging and list of works and apparatus and so on. The artist asked me to publish what you see here. So just one proposition for every page and its translation in English, and that's all. But my typographer calls me personally to tell me in a friendly tone that he could be able to put all those phrases on a single page. In that way, letting me save a lot of money. Yeah. To return to the most significant Italian works, I would like to highlight some of them, such as this wonderful books of Alighiero Boetti, whose title is Classifying the 1,000 Longest Rivers in the World, that he made together with his wife, Anne-Marie Sozo. They created it during a long period of time. They spent, in fact, 7 years researching the lengths of rivers, determining to come at a convincing accurate hierarchy, despite, the impossibility of absolute measurement. And this is a book by Giulio Paolini. That is maybe the most cultured artist that we have in Italy in this movement of, let's say, conceptual art. And then my collection, that now is your collection, there are many books of this artist. This one was published in Paris in 1976, and in which the writing forgets any communication to preserving only its appearance. Another artist, this one, taking part of the movement Arte Povera, Giuseppe Penone, carrying out their own skin is a very important book in which the sculptor carries out a meticulous photographic campaign of every detail of his body. Or the other sculpture of the same movement, that is Giovanni Anselmo. This is a book called Leggere, Reading, in which the word from a really minuscule arrives to occupy the whole page, making perfectly the idea and the weight of the sculpture. And one more very, very interesting is this one, that is by Yannis Kounellis, a Greek artist living for many, many years in Rome and died last year. He created this book, that's not a big one, but it's very important and very rare, during an exhibition at Galleria La Salita in Rome. I don't remember the year, but yes, 73, okay. And during the course of the week in which there were his exhibition, as an ancient rite, he went to the gallery and invoked Apollo, the god of light and the sun, lighting a match, and then gluing it on a page of the book, noting the day of the week. Then there is a category that I would like to call documents, which was particularly important to me in that late 70s and 80s, that I identify with the happening, the body art, and the performance, because I think that in these experiences, the use of the page of the book becomes fundamental documentation, in addition to the fact that it is also the stage and set design of a living work of art, able to use the various and new means of communication. I'm thinking, as an example, to the first happenings of Alan Caprow. Here I am with this artist after an happening that we made in my gallery in '74. And just another example that I wish to show you is of an artist that surely you don't know, that's called Katie LaRocca, an artist having been a visual poet at her beginnings, greatly involved in the feminist struggle, and then a great artist and performer. She died very young because of a cancer, while she was doing a fantastic work. This book is like a vocabulary in which the artist, with the gesture of her hands, establishes and reconstructs the communication as it was. Hence the title, In Principio Erat. But we have not talked about painter and paintings so far. They're only other kind of made artist book and art. And so I would like to introduce now an artist that to me is very important and with whom I have many exhibitions since 1968, his first exhibition. Griffa wrote about himself, I do not represent anything, I paint. His paintings were minimal and did not want to represent anything except to communicate the meaning of painting through a line or a sign. And all the artists I published are related to my stories. Also, Giorgio Griffa asked me one day in '73 to publish this one, Non c'è rosa senza spine. There was a phrase stolen from the writer. I remember that he was absolutely determined to publish this book, which was so an important work for him, a strong need to express himself. And then other movements like the poetry, the works of concrete poets, of whom we have here 3 booklets made at the end of the '60s by Arrigo Loratotino and Sandro De Alexandris, that can be transformed in object, or the visual poets that are often polemical and highly politicized, like this one. This is the great Eugenio Miccini with his the insurrectional development plan for Florence, or this one that is Irma Blanc. His name is not Italian, but she is now, which poses the problem of understanding and perception of signs, where writing become an image, an open text, a text for everyone, for those who can read and for those who cannot read. And I would have finished with this image. I just would like to add that I always collect books in some way, but I only began to work on them from 20 years, I think. It was at the end of the 90s. Organizing an exhibition in my gallery, first one, and then working to kind of inventory one can say this way. Of all the artist book made in Italy, and then this work has been published and has become the first document that we had in Italy at that time on this field of artist books. Then I write something and curate other exhibition, and that's all. I would finish here, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Liliana. Okay. Our next speaker is Robert J. Ruben, private collector, New York. The title of his talk will be Robert J. Ruben and Yvonne Korshak Ruben Collection of Artist Books in the Thomas J. Watson Library. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to thank Midney and Ken and Tony for the privilege of being here, and also would like to thank the Watson Library and the Metropolitan Museum of Art for the privilege of housing my collection and keeping more coming. It is truly an honor, and for me, as you will see at the end of this, a very satisfying accomplishment to have the books here and the way they're being used. What I'm going to do this afternoon is kind of look why I got into this, what I've collected, just a sample, when and where they're going. I think one of the major reasons why I did this is that they gave me pleasure. And here we see one of Claire Van Viet's Circle of Wisdom of Hildegard. This is a fold-out book. It's her hand-colored paper, her handmade paper. I've had some other experience with Hildegard many years ago, and this has always struck me as showing a lot of what this poet, and she was an abbot's, head of a nunnery back in the 13th century, about her, and gives a spirit. And it is also, to me, just a beautiful book. It made me happy to have this. It made me happy to exhibit it once, and it's even happier to have it here. Now, what gets into this? As a youngster, I was usually left weekends with my mother's people who were Orthodox, and they would take me to their shul, and I learned a lesson there. Books were never thrown away. If they were finished, they were buried as a person. And Eve and I have actually seen this. One of our friends died some years ago. This has always stuck with me. A book is something very real, very special. It's a transmission of information, whatever form it is. So I guess you would say I have a spiritual end of it. For a surgeon, I'm not supposed to, but that's beside the point. And my really experience starts back here. This is me as a freshman at Princeton and Pine Hall. And there are two men at Princeton who had a great influence on me. And these were on your left, Elmer Adler. I met Elmer when he was carrying some heavy boxes of Holder, taking them up to the library, and my mother taught me to be very polite. Sir, can I help you? I didn't know who he was, and he said yes. The next thing I knew, he sat on a high chair, and I started putting every single book on the shelf in the graphic arts department, and he lectured me about it. It was one heck of an education. Lasted me ever since. The other was my very good friend, Gillette Good-Griffin, who was really the first curator after Adler left. And over the years, Gillette and I were very friendly. He taught me a lot more about books. He taught me about conceptual art, about how to appreciate things, both ancient and modern. So to these two people, I really owe my education in this and my enthusiasm for collecting. So one of the things that I like to do is to make order out of chaos. And this is blast number 3, Jordan Crandall. This was the X Art Foundation. And I have a whole series of these multiple, as you see, I say, and many others. I'm actually one of the authors in this, and Jordan would get a group of artists, and how I got into this is something else again. And this is very much a type of history of what was happening, of what was going on contemporarily. I have a series of these, and I also have a series of other people who did these box books. This is a very interesting and very, I think, useful way of documenting what's happening. Another one, and here we see another Mirani. I don't think this is the first, but it's very early. But this also needs preservation. These are very delicate books, the writing on it, the whole concept. And I also find the intrinsic beauty of looking at this, looking what has been written. And by the way, it's written in, you see, 5 or 6 languages here. Really just a tremendous tour de force of an object which is very human, very real, very beautiful, but also needs a safe house. This is one of my earlier books as well. What? Subject, sheer aesthetic. In fact, this is probably the first 2 or 3 so-called artist books that I bought. It all happened one day in San Francisco. I was on my day job lecturing at the American College of Surgeons, and at lunch I walked down Union Street and I saw this kind of funny stuff sitting in the window of a thing called Califia with Edwina Leggett. And luckily I had my ticket to come home, else I would have sold that as well. And this is one of the first ones that I bought, and it's actually McDermott did the poetry, and Julie did the visual artist, and we see the octopus, and this is a very early Flying Fish Press. Over the years, I've gotten to know Ms. Chen quite well and have accumulated a number of her books, one better than the other. I think we'll see in another. Also, the poetry here, the whole story, is really very compelling. I've looked at this book many, many times and never tired of it. I think this goes to something to both the author and the artist and the design. Another, and this is Lois Morrison, who's a local person here in New Jersey. Somebody asked me at lunch, which is my favorite book. That's hard to say, but this comes close to it. This is a fold-out pop-up book, which has a social political area. And what is the endangered species? Children. Children and poverty. This has a professional interest to me. What do? I take care of children as a pediatric otolaryngologist, as a surgeon. And the beauty of it certainly speaks for itself. The composition, the way it opens up these exploding flowers with these children and endangered. What better message could you have? How anything could be more well told and more meaningful than this? I don't know. She's done a lot of books, and I've just picked one of each of hers. Back to Julie Chen again. This is environmental, her whole thing of panorama. This is a magnificent pop-up which deals with our problems of environment, and relatively early, well, not early, 2008. It's a very large book. It opens up about the size of this podium, and I think it's here now in the museum. Again, we're looking at both the intrinsic beauty of it, which characterizes all of Julie's work. It's looking at the message of it. It's looking at the form of it. It is something that shouldn't always have to sit in a hidden shelf. It is something that should be open and public should be able to see, and that is what is happening here in the museum. Let's go to another one. One of the offshoots of artist books, and artist books are pretty much as anyone else wants to define them, are the so-called graphic novels. And certainly Marcel is the master of the graphic novel. We have a lot of his classical ones, but I came across this some years ago, and this is 1946, and it's Remember, and it's a series of lithographs, not woodcuts, which lithographs are very unusual for him, about the horrors of warfare. It's really a recollection of Goya's work as well. This is not the usual Massorel, which is small quarto. This is a large folio. And I think it's exceptional art. This is one of the less grisly pictures here. I didn't want to give you the real grisly ones, but he really goes to the point. He's changed what he's done here. The story, as this was done still during the Nazi occupation of France, was then printed in Switzerland, and then after the war was distributed. And it, again, is part of what I've kind of, do I have a system of collection? No, what I like, but what I feel is important. And a lot of this has to do with humanity, or the inhumane of human beings against humanity. This is one of the books that I found very, very early, and I think I was still at Princeton when I bought this one. This is Patchen's Sleepers Awake. And what struck me was an 18 or 19-year-old, gee whiz, what is he doing with the print? What is he doing with the type? And I guess I learned this. This was the book I bought back in probably 52, 53. It stuck with me. Again, another form of the artist book. This is commercially large number of numbers. He's done others. But again, it tells a very real story. Part of the artist book is this is a story over time or space. When we read the usual codex, yeah, we turn the pages, but that's not so important. It's just what's on the type. Many of the artist books, the turning of the pages is actually telling you the story. And here, Patchen combines both standard codex plus the artistic end of it. Another of my favorite ones is this one, House of Cards, not cards, but cards. This is Linda Smith, a pop-up. And what she's doing here, this is again very much similar to Julie's Panorama. This is an environmentalist book. The cod fisheries have been fished out. And here we see she's with the double entendre of the cards, the shaky house of cards, and the book pops up along with the fishnet. It folds down and pops up. Again, it's an experience of more than just the text. It's something over time and space. It's an added message, which I think is an important message and should be seen, not just hidden on a shelf. Somebody also asked me, did I ever have a book that I wanted to have made for myself? Yes, this is one. It's an interesting story. Paul Johnson, Back to Time Remembered. I again was on my day job in Manchester, England, and went out for lunch. Manchester's a miserable place. Got to the library and saw artist books in the card catalog, and then I all of a sudden remembered, yes, Manchester, arts and crafts. And I figured out the university, they had a big artist book collection, so down I went. It was being repaired, and then I met Johnson. I said, gee, I saw his stuff. I'd love to get one. He said, I'm leaving for Guam the next morning to teach children how to draw. I said, can I meet you at 6 o'clock in the morning in your home? This is summertime in England, so it's light. Yes, his house looked very much like this, and we chatted a little bit, painted it. It was really wild. Painted what he painted. I said, I would like one. Kind of, this is what I want. And about 2 months later, what arrived through the transom, but Back to Remember Time. So it's a pop-up. It's more than amusing. It's well thought out and aesthetically very pleasing. Let's look at some more of these. This one. This comes from Art Metropole. I've bought many books from Printed Matter and also Art Metropole in Toronto. And this one, I think, speaks for itself. That's a little nail up there. I know very little about the artist. I know that she teaches art in the Canadian and the province of Ontario, but I know nothing more about her. But I always thought this one really kind of told the story. And again, it's more than just a piece. That's now. One of the earliest books I bought was this. I bought this in Europe, 1942. I was a kid on a motorcycle. And it struck me, one page written in Dutch, and the other page, these rather gruesome hands. And I know a little German, so I was able to figure out more or less what the Dutch was saying. Then I'm still at Princeton. A friend of mine was from Holland. He was in the same co-op club that I was in. He had it translated for me. Essentially what this is, on the written side, is what the Germans were saying, how nice they were, and on the pictorial side, what was really happening. This goes on for about 30 or 40 pages. This was probably that and the Patchen, the first artist books that I'd ever purchased. I didn't know what I was doing until I wound up in Califia. And I think this is a very moving, it's not a very big book, and that too is, I think, now here in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Uh, Speaking of multiples, Ronald King, I think many of us know I own a bunch of his things, but Turn Over Darling, for those of you who don't know this book, as you turn over each page, she's there but in a different pose. It's one of the cleverest things imaginable. It's a small little book with multiple printings. I think I bought this at a shop in Washington years and years ago. Again, I like the form, I like the message, I like the composition, I like the artistic way in which she had done this. How am I doing the time, Don? Well, okay, so I thought. Okay. Another book, this is Women's Studio Workshop, Tanya Keller. This is Mom. Here again, the political things of what happened during the Second World War. What this is essentially a picture of an arm with a concentration camp tattoo, and on one side is the diary in Czech, on the other side is the translation. And you turn this page after page after page, and you have the story, the horrors, and how they survive. This is a pair. There's also a father. Again, they both now live here. But this is really, and by the way, it's boxed in a plain wooden box, and for those of you who realize this is the traditional type of coffin which is used for Orthodox Jews. So that's in the box. So there's meaning, there's history. This, I think, can tell a person much more than just reading about it in the page. It is a message in time and space and emotion. And this is what I think is such an important part of the artist book conception, and why it's also so important to have these books exposed and really known by public of people of all ages. Here is another book which is political. Angela Lawrence, who's an expatriate American who lives in Bologna. Her studio is an old granary and a nunnery. It's kind of interesting. A lot of Angela's things. This one is called Binding Ties. Now, what's that all about? The ties are regimental ties. The binding is kept, and as you read each one, you pull it through up and down, you can see what was happened with the labor conditions, how they were abused, so forth and so on. So there are messages within messages with this, and it's really very, very well put out, as all Angela's things is well thought out and extremely important work. This is a more contemporary book, perhaps it's scary, by a very own escape group. What happens if they bomb New York, how they escape again to New Jersey. Again, it tells you a story. It tells you a story in time and space, and from an aesthetic point of view, it's really superb. Another one is, this is one of Robin's many books. This one I brought with us. 30 words. The people at some concentration camps were told to write 30 good words so people wouldn't think bad things were happening to them. This is one of many of Robin's really great books, and I feel privileged to have owned this, and I'm very happy that this too now will live here. Here's one of Mindy's. Okay, this is a long story. I bought this book in Califia. Yeah, this is the same thing. Okay, I had to. So many years ago, Mrs. Ruben was lecturing in Chicago, and I was left to my own devices in New York. And I had been at a dinner party about a week before with the art critic for the Frankfurter Zeitung, and she didn't know from beans about artist books, and her husband was the ambassador. So I thought he was away, so I thought I would invite them to the apartment. I got some cucumber sandwiches, and I knew Mindy, we were doing something else. Mindy opens the door, and there's a look on her face. God knows what you were thinking. I didn't know what was happening. There was her book. And this is an AIDS book, really. And the story is that a very good friend of hers had died of AIDS. He had these little candies up there, but the mice had eaten them. I have a whole series of aid books and medical books, an artist book, again, which tells more of a story than just the plain printed word. This is another one of my many favorites, Ed Hutchins' What a Pie, and it's just hilarious. Ed does many of these things. Many of his things are political. Also, his are inexpensive. Some of these books, can be 4 figures. Ed's runs about $25, multiple editions, and he does many things. Again, he really adds to, the quality of life. We've seen this before today, but this is McKelvey and also Ed Koch's Diogenes defections, and we heard another description. But again, this is another great book with a great idea, which tells many stories. The casing is a ceramic casing, and it's printed on lead, so we don't want to get too much of it around so you don't absorb the air. But again, a very important book that tells a wonderful message. So, last but not least, in closing, where? They're now here in the Watson Library. I, for one, am grateful for the opportunity that these and many more of my books, which will be coming over in the next year or so, are here because, as we've already heard, they have classes, they teach, they're used, they just don't sit on the shelf. So I feel I'm honored, as all I can say is thank you.
Robert, thank you very much. Okay, our last speaker before the Q&A is Mindell Dubansky, museum librarian, preservation, Metropolitan Museum of Art. Mindell will be speaking about book structures for artist books, the ingenious and self-destructive. Still the same title.
Okay, I'm the caboose. Okay, so the original, this talk originally had another title like "What Were They Thinking?" But I decided to, be very positive because really I wanted to impart a positive message about book structure and materials and just thinking about how books are made and what makes them last. This is a Doug Mew book. It's the only book I have in my slideshow that actually is both ingenious and self-destructive, intentionally, because Doug makes books that are filled with seeds and they're metamorphic and they grow and they age and they die and they're really wonderful. So I have 2 slides of text. That's it. You'll have to bear with me because I just wanted to impart some of these ideas. But what makes a structure successful? What do artists think what artists should be thinking about in order to ensure that their bindings are exactly what they want them to be? Their books communicate physically and the way they want them to. So first, these aren't in any particular order, but they're just issues. And one is that the structure, and the material, and the aesthetic aspects of the book all should be compatible with their content, and they should. So you can't just think about to select structures and materials that complement and help with your message, or sometimes they are your message. The skill of the binder, that might be a person, it might be a commercial bindery, it might be something you have done at Kinko's, but the idea is, did you pick the right place to make the right kind of binding that you need to make your book most effective? And the choices are endless. There's really a lot of opportunities. Then, of course, functionality. How do you want your book to work? How do you want it to function? How do you want it to feel in people's hands? All those things are deliberate choices that an artist needs to make. And sometimes I think the most important thing about a book, certainly in conservation, is the grain. And if you don't know what grain is, you can ask me in the Q&A. But basically, if you've ever torn a newspaper, you know that it tears really nicely and straight one way and really crooked and jagged another way, and that's grain. So it's the fibers of the materials aligning in a single direction, and a book, the grain of all materials ideally should be parallel with the spine of the book. And that sometimes gets shortcutted because of cheapness, or I guess they want to use, they want to use it cuts down on the cost of materials, or they're just not thinking about it. Permanence and durability are issues artists should think about because they relate to how long is your object going to last, and how long will it fully function for? Because every object has a fold endurance. There's only so many times you can fold a page or turn a page back and forth before it'll crack in half. That's why we buy 2 copies sometimes. And another very important issue is making an accurate prototype. So every artist, ideally, making especially an edition, but even a unique book, should make, when I say an accurate prototype, I mean they should be using the scale, exact materials they want to use, and change nothing. Because once you've made your prototype, it proves your idea. Like, does it work or doesn't it work? And you can see where all the weak points are. And of course, for an artist book, in many cases, it's the ability for the book to be well exhibited. If you make a book that's an accordion book, for example, out of very floppy paper, and you could never stand it up, maybe it's not doing what you want it to do. So it's the deliberateness of like, yes, a person has to read it, but it also needs to be exhibited if that's what you are looking for. And also, there are the issues relating to where the book's going to live, how it's going to be handled, and how it's going to be exhibited. And of course, the reader's experience, to me personally, is very important, because there's nothing more irritating than trying to like have access to a book that won't open, or clamp shut as soon as you know, or it's so heavy that it's like breaking your leg, or whatever, or your arms, like just to open it. So I think those issues are important. If you're making a book that has certain environmental requirements, if it's chocolate that melts, or I don't know what, people make books out of food all the time, that you need to think about are there any issues relating to your idea? Like, do you need to adjust your idea, or is it a good idea, or is it a bad idea? It could go either way. I mean, you might, as long as it's intentional, it could be anything. And then, of course, handling requirements. Very often, specific books have specific handling requirements. They're just too challenging for people. And so I think artists need to think about how easy is this book to be handled? Is it very clear how it should be handled? And then a lot of artists make wrappers and enclosures as part of their object, and often those boxes need boxes, because so like they don't fit. Sometimes they actually damage the book. So I think that your enclosure, the kind of wrapper or enclosure, is something very important to consider for lots of reasons: aesthetic reasons, physical reasons, protective reasons. And then ideally, if artists do have complicated books, they should definitely think about providing exhibition instructions, and even stands or cradles or specific kinds of, and many books do come with their own book supports. So now I'll show you a bunch of examples. This could be like a whole day lecture, but it's not. So I'm going to just go through like the basics, and I hope that something sinks in. And this isn't just for the artists; it's for the collectors, the dealers. Like, you have to know what you're dealing with, right? Because sometimes you're going to run into trouble, and if you can jump in there ahead of time, you can avoid damage to the books. You can understand what it is you're looking. If you're cataloging, you'll have better insight into it. I would say by far the pamphlet is the most common book structure that everybody uses, and it's fantastic because it is so simple. You don't have to be a bookbinder to make a pamphlet. You can have pop-ups, fold-outs. It's so flexible as a structure. And the one, is this the pointer? I don't know what the pointer is. Oh, is it the shiny thing with the red flashing on it? So the one problem with a pamphlet is that if you make it too fat, it shoves the pages out. You've all experienced this in your old composition books, right? And then the pages in the front come out like an arrow. So what happens, and it also changes the margins on your paper. So if you're printing a book and you want it to be a fat pamphlet, you've got to adjust the margins, because otherwise you won't have any margin on the forehead. You might cut your text off. So that's the only problem I can see with a pamphlet. And also, I hate staples, but everybody seems to use them. I would rather see it sewn or something. There's other ways too. And I've tried to illustrate this with books from our collection. Some of them we have upstairs. So this is just an example of how flexible the pamphlet is. This is like a genius book by Gabrielle Fox, where she took 6 little pamphlets and sewed them onto a leather hinge, and she kind of simulated a leather fine binding. But it's such a simple binding, and you don't really need to be a very accomplished binder to make this book, and yet the artist got a lot of bang for their buck out of this little binding. And it shows you how flexible. That's why I put it there. Now, these are like cringe-worthy things, which we've seen so many of today. Basically, all are horrible. And I would say if you had to prioritize them, the worst one is the spiral. And the reason why the spiral is the worst is because it's a spiral. It's not an O-ring. So when you open the book suddenly shifts into two planes, right? And then it has that sharp thing on the bottom. So when you open it up, it like stabs the book. Plus all the pages become perforated, and eventually they all fall out. So that's what happens when they wind up in the library. So the good thing about this structure is that it opens perfectly flat. And also it opens like 360. And those are very positive aspects. And they're cheap as anything. So So if I were to wanted to pick this type of binding, as many artists have, that sometimes this binding is really integral to the message of the book, like in Tal Auerbach's book Helix, which it's all about, that it's a spiral binding. I would pick an O-ring because the O-ring it's just more protective. The O-ring is this one here where the O's are straight, as opposed to on an angle like the spiral is. And at the end, there's no sharp thing that stabs into it, so it's a little bit better. The plastic combs, so many people love these, but they become very brittle. They break the pages. It's a hot mess. Spend a little money and have a nice binding. That's all I have to say. So there's a whole realm of these constricted structures. I always call them constricted structures, which means like the book was perfectly open before you bound it, but then when they bind it, it does not open. So when does this work? It works in a flip book. It's perfect structure for a flip book. It's cheap. This is a post binding. You buy these 2 metal screw posts from the stationery store, punch a few holes. Next thing you know, you got a binding. So in some cases, it's perfect. And in other cases, if you expect a book that you bind in this way to open, you better make really wide margins or use really soft paper. So there's ways around like getting these things to work, but you have to know what they are. So if you think you're making a simple binding so you don't have to consult a bookbinder or a book conservator, you're wrong. You should definitely consult, even if you're designing something simple, or make your prototype and you'll see if it works or if it doesn't work. So this is sort of a pet peeve that a lot of binders have, which is the side stitch Japanese style binding. So this is in my what were they thinking category because it's such a simple book. It's the text are a page that have a fold, and the foredge, it's a 4-edge fold. And the inside, it's only printed on one side, and then there's holes made through the spine of the book about half an inch in, and then it's oversewn. Stab sewn side stitching is one term for that. Now, in the real, can you tell how this book doesn't open? And the reason why it doesn't open is because they used a very high quality, very beautiful, heavy Western printmaking paper for the book. So the paper, this structure totally depends on the flexibility of the paper for it to open. So if you're using a rigid paper, it's not going to open. Now, if you don't want your book to open, it's perfect. But in the real world, this is like a 2-inch thick side stitch binding. But you can see how beautifully how it opens to provide full access to the page because the paper is so soft, which is how this structure is really technically paired with. Oh my God, it goes fast, doesn't it? So board book. This is like a children's book. The only problem and it opens beautifully. The only problem with this type of book is the entire durability of it is focused on how strong is the paper and how strong is that piece of cloth, because that's what's holding this book together. So if I made that book, I would use really strong paper and really strong cloth, and it'll still open flat just because the structure is that type of a structure. So like the pamphlet, the accordion book is a really flexible structure, really great structure, a structure that you don't need a heck of a lot of talent for. And boy, you can really come up with so many results that you would never know they were all the same structure. There's just so much breadth in the structure for aesthetic creation. And this was one that we made, Adriana made a prototype at work because it was a really thin paper and a really fat accordion, but they wanted to look like a regular codex. And so they put magnets inside the covers, and so that it held it together as a codex. And that was really kind of a genius thing too, structure. This is the only book I've ever seen that structure in. And that's Adriana's model down there. And of course, the classic Venetian blind accordion book style, which is Marilyn Rosenberg. She's here with us today. And of course, Haiti Kyle is here with us today, which is such a blessing for us. And I believe this is one of her very early flag books, April Diary, and it's just also a pamphlet. An accordion book. So the back part of this book is a short accordion, and all these little flags are just pasted onto the sides of the accordion in 2 different directions. This is probably the most used structure. I mean, it is so widely used, and I'm going to talk more about Haiti in a minute. And then, of course, there's the adaptation of historic book structures and features. And these are books that usually have exposed sewing. People who love to see the structure of the book, the sewing on the spine, the headbands, the wooden boards, the sort of medieval look. Coptic bindings come out of this tradition. A lot of artists are using these. Also, it's all about sewing. It's folding and sewing. That's all you need to do to make this book. You don't need to be an experienced bookbinder. And this is a really strange book that we went on a field trip to Brooklyn recently, and we went to a Japanese antique store, and we found this amazing stiff board stub binding, which I'd never seen anything like this before. So you've seen books that have been, stub bindings, right? Like books with heavy boards. How do you make those books open? You have to hinge the pages together in some way so the pages can move because the paper itself doesn't move. So there's all kinds of stub bindings. And this one is very interesting because they found a way, usually when you have a straight, where am I going with this thing? Usually when I have a straightforward stub binding, it's straight. But when you get to the middle of the book, it doesn't open because there's just not enough space between the stubs and the two pieces, the spine stub and the page. And here those of you who are binders can really appreciate how elegant this is. We need to buy that book. I love that book. And this is, of course, Paul Johnson's, one of Paul Johnson's books. One of the things I wanted to point out here is that Paul Johnson put a lot of effort to planning like how wide to make his spine so that his book shut. So that's just what I wanted to make is like sometimes people put all this effort into their binding and they didn't leave enough space in the shoulders and in the joints to make their books close because they don't understand the relationships between in the binding. I don't want to go into too much technical detail. And then Claire, she's in a class of her own because all of her books, none of her books have adhesive. They're just ingenious folded, beautiful folding structures. And she actually did publish a book on how to make these structures. They're so personal to her, I can't almost imagine anybody else doing them. And I'm almost at the end, and that is, I feel bear with me. So these are two structures that artists made for their books. So I just want to say I hate slipcases, and maybe there's a reason why occasionally I don't hate them, but it's hard to get the book in and out of a slipcase without damaging the book. So they may be beautiful, they may be made of costly materials, but who cares? I don't like them. So if you're going to make, I'm last, so I'm like, Ken told me I should cut loose a little bit. So I have to wake you up because we're going to be drinking after this. So then I just wanted to point out, if I had to make a beautiful box for a book, I would make a clamshell box or a drop slide box, a box that fully opens, that you have access to your book. But even those you can mess up if you make them too tight. Or if you use an abrasive material, like even some of the book cloth you could buy, like Canopet, a very common book cloth from Tallis, it's rough. And if your paper is very fragile, the binding material is very fragile, you're like sanding it off every time you drag it in and out of the book. So all these things have to be considered. And I really recommend that you make a box for your box if you have a beautiful box and you want it to stay in good shape, or you use these vendors that like Tower Auerbach does, because these vendors will make you a custom box and they will design it, help you design it, or they will respond to your design. And so for like $20 you can have an amazing, beautiful custom box, either a protective box or a box that's part of your design from these vendors. So I do recommend that artists use some of the commercial vendors more creatively than they do, because those are great resources for you. And then, of course, you need to plan always to support your book, whether you're reading it. If you're at the reading room table, if you're for an exhibition, the days of like hanging out with having a cup of coffee with a book on your lap are over. You have to every time you handle that book, you have to do as little damage to it as possible, because every time you handle a book, you are going to be damaging it. It's just the way it is. These things have a lifespan. So book supports, book cradles, little tools to help you turn pages on difficult books, and finding lots and lots of book supports. You can ask me questions about this later. And finally, I just can't even couldn't consider having this talk without paying homage to at least only 3, but there are more. There's so many more. But I chose my top three favorite people in this world who have done so much to help the book artists, who have created these template designs that they have been out there teaching and publishing, that are just genius designs that have allowed so many people that really wouldn't have had the skill themselves to design these books to make the wonderful books that we all experience today. And Haiti, you're here, so I want to applaud you for your marvelousness. And Haiti and her daughter Ula, who is not here today, I've been waiting for this for decades, came out with an instructional book. They're out of the phone. Oh man, sorry, I didn't hear it. Helps to be deaf. Then there's Keith Smith, who has published over, I think, 8 books, instructional books, mostly focusing on oversewing, on decorative sewing and exposed spines. And boy, these are, I don't have to tell you about him. And then I just love Gary Frost always, and it's hard to talk about him without also mentioning Craig Jensen, where he worked together at Book Lab, but who really was one of the first people to explore the excellence of early bindings and apply those structures to contemporary books. That's as concisely as I can say that. And had designed new books based on old models that were really good matches to fine edition binding, and many hundreds of people have used these structures. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. If our panelists can come to the front, please. Just have a little time for a few questions. Okay. And as we've done for the previous 2 panels, do the panelists or speakers have any questions for one another, or otherwise we can open up for the audience? Okay, we'll go right to audience questions. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, I just wanted to, is this working?
Yes.
Thank you both so much for choosing us to give us your collections, because it is such a joy to have both of your collections, to work with them every day, to protect them, to make them available, and it's like a miracle. I've been waiting for something like this to happen for so long. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions from the audience?
I'm Michael Joseph. This isn't a question, but Dr. Ruben mentioned Lois Morrison, her book Endangered Species. And I want to second Lois Morrison. I think she is a national resource. And I think the book arts community should find some way to honor itself by finding some way to honor Lois Morrison. I think she's great, and I wanted to add her to Bindi's pantheon of exemplars.
I think she's done many books, and I just showed one. I probably have a half dozen of hers. Some are cut out, some are in the form of carousel. She's a virtuoso, a superb performer. You've got nowhere to go, but really, I would agree, sir.
Robin? In the middle.
Robin Silverberg, since I didn't say my name before. I was wondering why you chose the Met. And the Met, I'm very grateful. I'm a New Yorker, so now I will have access to your books. But I imagine there's many very sad Italian institutions that would have loved to have your books. So I'm curious if that's a national incidence or what's going on.
Well, we have many institutions in Italy, but in Italy artist books are not known at all. And so we don't have an institution that can keep a collection of artist books. It doesn't exist. I can say that 10 years ago, maybe 12, I gave my collection on loan to the only museum, modern and contemporary museum, who keep it very well. But people couldn't see it, and it has stayed 10 years in these same boxes. And so after the 10 years, I decided to bring it with me, the collection. And in the meantime, I knew I have the possibility to know Ken sooner, and we begin speaking about it, and this is the reason for my collection went here. And I'm very happy because I never seen just so many people speaking on artist book. Never in my life. So I'm really very, very happy that my books stay here.
I'd also like to answer that. I think private collector has several options. One, goes at auction upon the Mies or some other type. Two, another thing is university. And three, if you can find some place that is willing to expose these to a large audience. And this came out of conversations, I guess, with Ken at the Grolier or the Salvatoni at the Center for Book Arts. And you look for something, an institution that's going to be around for a century or two, that helps, to an institution that is going to utilize them. And I think that this is here, and that is universities are good, but universities is rather narrow for the number of people who will see them. So the auction goes, a private collector, when she or he puts that together, is really the sum is much greater than the parts. You're doing something very special, something very unique. You aren't constrained by a board or this. The only thing you're constrained about is, one, your pocketbook and how much shelf space you have, and the latter is not important.
Mark Demunation, Library of Congress. I'd just like to say the Library of Congress is a really large institution that does a lot of outreach as well. So if any of you are wondering if there are other options in the room, I just thought I'd bring that up. Thank you.
Well, yeah, but hold on, there's one advantage. This is rather close to where I live.
Questions? Is there a question up front? William?
Hi, Jan Garden Castro. I'm just wondering, how much are these works exhibited in any case, no matter what size the institution is or how prestigious it is, it's always, you're only showing a minuscule portion of your collection, and especially, I would think, with book arts.
Half a loaf's better than no loaf.
Yeah, and if a book is well cataloged, as any book in the Watson Library would be, anybody can find it any time and come and see it. They don't have to wait for an exhibition.
Also, another advantage of a museum is essentially the restoration, which is, Mindy, that's your day job. Mm-hmm. They take good care of it and they repair, so I think that's more advantages to it.
And I think also that artist books can be exhibited when there are shows that involve the artists who have made artist books seriously. So, because artist book is not known, I think, to stay all the time closed in a shelf, but it's a work. It has been considered as a work. So, at the same way of a video or a photograph or something, work of art made with other media, that the usual must have the possibility to be shown and to be seen from the public.
I mean, at the Met, we've had a huge increase in requests for books for all exhibitions across the institution. So there's a lot more inclusion of books in any kind of show from any department, and it's just really grown. And also the Johnson Gallery, which is, when you come up to the steps and go through the corridor, the Prince Department towards the back big galleries, they always show their books there.
And I'll also add that before we spoke about the vitrines in the physical space of Watson Library, we also have an Instagram account for the Met Library with 24,000 followers. And already the number of books that we've shown or posts that we've had featuring artist books from these collections is pretty substantial. So that's even a higher number of people that are coming through physically in a way of getting the word out that these books are here and available and accessible. And we do have a very generous, friendly lending policy also. So even if there are institutions and even if there are exhibitions happening elsewhere, not within the Met, we're very helpful and eager and supportive in lending for those exhibitions.
So as a collector, I'm wondering, how does the thinking and the creative process of the actual collection, the work you did, respectively putting together your collections, travel with your collection? That is to say, 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, with us, what is around to identify the things that you went through and the feeling you had for collections and its significance?
Probably the collection has to stand on its own 2 feet. There's no guarantees. You choose an institution that, insofar as you can tell, is going to be responsible to it. All the collections are idiosyncratic. What happens 50 years from now, you can't guarantee. The best you can do is say, okay, this is a group that is sympathetic, that's willing to take care of it, that has a reasonable track record and is going to be around. The rationale behind it, again, has to speak for itself. If, let's say, eventually if they wanted to show a whole series of books that deal with the Holocaust, which are artist books, okay, they can easily delve into my collection and have 20, 30, or 40 books like this. So there are no guarantees.
Well, you have a catalog.
Yeah, catalog. But I think the gentleman is looking at you put something together with a rationale. What would happen to it? Will the same rationale stay? Probably not.
I think we have time for about.
But I would add that I think it's marvelous that symposia such as this very symposium are filmed and part of your archives, so that the very things that have been said today will be, in fact, available through the library for others to know even 50 or 60 years from now.
Thank you.
Hand back.
Yep.
Ian Kahn, Lux Mentis Books. I want to touch on sort of the other end of something that was touched on earlier, which is while sort of democratized printing is great for artist books, at the other end of the spectrum, and something I'm seeing more of, is this complexity between artists becoming sort of capital A artists, which is to say their work is effectively getting priced out of library collections and becoming only, if you will, fodder for museums. Someone from MoMA not that long ago said, I love artist books. I can buy a dozen artist book pieces for what one Lichtenstein costs me. On one hand, I was pleased that they're looking at artist books. On the other, that bothered me. The flip side of that is I have things that I would love for Mark to have, but I know that they're just never going to end up at the LC unless someone decides to buy it and give it to him. Curious what people think about what happens.
And my business card is available.
There's a response.
Janice Orsman from the Grow Your Club. We've talked a lot about seasoned collectors. Is that a good way to put it? I'm wondering if there are young collectors who are showing an interest in supporting the continuation of these wonderful artist books.
Yeah. Well, I think, Janice, one of the venues for this would be something like the Center for Book Arts, where every Friday night there is another session. It's, I think, one of the best free parties in town for people somewhat under 60. Those are the very young ones, or under 70.
Talking about real young.
I think we have that venue, and I think there are other venues around, and there are whatever you want to define young. I think there are people out there like that.
But do we know who they are? I mean, have they started to have a voice?
I would think the Center for Book Arts has a pretty good idea who they are.
There's the Honey and Wax Collecting Prize that highlights particularly young generation of collectors, and a friend of mine, Therese Francis in Queens, is one of those. She has J Expressions. It's a pop-up bookshop of very specific collection. And if you look at the Honey and Wax, if you Google that, you can see the various people that they are highlighting.
Hi, I'm Miriam Scher, and in addition to the Center for Book Arts, which has this really great programming, if you've been to the PS1 fair, that happens every fall, there's, how many people were there? 10, 15,000 people?
In each room.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of mad. And so many young people are there. It's really exciting. They're making books, they're selling books, they're buying books. It's really quite remarkable. I'm always, as someone who's been making books myself for quite a long time, I'm always excited and astonished and amazed how much interest there is and has developed in artist books. Now, are they livre d'artistes fine bindings? Not necessarily. The PS1 Fair has work across the board, but a lot of zines, a lot of low-end, things in a more affordable price range. But it's great. It's all great. It's all a big part of what's going to help the book arts continue to flourish and thrive as we move forward and we move on.
And I think is there a mic still out?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have one last question, and then because there's a wine getting warm, or I don't know, not cold, and it's great. There's so much energy and interest, but we can definitely continue things up there with. So Amanda,
more of a celebration, just to think about the perfection and kind of perfect nature of the book, insofar as we talk about the many communities that are gathering, such like today, to talk about artist books, and the College Book Art Association, American Printing History Association, Friends of Dart Hunter, the Guild of Bookworkers. There are a lot of individual groups already with long histories who are coming together and recognizing the power of aesthetic representation and documenting our human story in this wonderful format. So, yay books, and thank you for hosting such a wonderful symposium.
Sure, pleasure. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for staying here, sticking it out. I also do want to send a special thank you to Noelle and Stephen and Jessica for helping with all the technical stuff. It was a very smooth day on that end. Coats. A couple quick notes. One is that if you have anything in the coat rooms down here, bags or coats, please grab them now. Secondly, is that this was videotaped, and the videos will be up on the Watson Line website, so you can share. Lastly, if you look for Watson Library staff, we'll guide you to get back upstairs. Any Watson Library staff, you can raise your hand if you know where to point people. Follow the masses, but get your coats and your bags first, please.